Hello my dear friends, you're in the MilitarySummary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And first we're going to talk about Kharkiv direction. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And before we just start discussing the situation on the ground, I would like to share with you the statement of the 79th Brigade, and they stated and published very interesting post. They're saying, the forces of 79th Brigade, that the Russians stacked on Kharkiv direction. This is very important and very interesting statement, at least this very interesting point of view, because the Ukrainians are saying, or start, let's say, spreading the information that the Russians stacked and they will not be able to move much further to the south. So very interesting situation, but if we discuss in details and when talking about the barriers, the buffer zone that Putin promised to create, the main target of that buffer zone was not to capture Kharkiv, not to, let's say, move forces to Dnieper River. The thing that Putin wanted to do is to force the Ukrainians to leave 3 settlements. This is the town by the name of Lyptsi, this is it, and the Russians currently are storming this area. We got updates during the previous night that the Russians launched full-scale offensive operation to enter this village. The second town is Vovchansk, and the Russians are also storming the town, at least the northern part. And the third town that the Russians promised or need to take under control is the area in the vicinity of Kazachye Lopань Udi. So this direction, a little bit further to the west from, let's say, Lyptsi. Why is that? Because from these towns like Vovchansk, Lyptsi, Kazachye Lopань and Udi, the Ukrainians were attacking and bombing Belgorod, because the distance between, let's say, these towns like Udi and Belgorod, the distance is around 40 kilometers. Kazachye Lopань and Belgorod, the distance is almost the same, 40 kilometers. The distance between Lyptsi and Belgorod is also 40 kilometers, and the distance between Vovchansk and Lyptsi and Belgorod as well also around the 40 kilometers. So this is the reason why the Russians want to force, because this is the perfect distance for artillery, for Ukrainian vampires, for Ukrainian, I don't know, all types of artillery systems they have that can attack on this distance, right? So this is the reason, and I'm not sure, if you ask my opinion, I'm not sure whether the Russians are planning to move further to the south after Lyptsi. They will be, if the Russians capture Lyptsi, Vovchansk, Kazachye Lopань and Udi, it will be enough for the Russians, at least at this stage of the special military operation, to force the Ukrainians to send their artillery to Kharkiv, and after that the Ukrainians will lose their possibilities to bomb Belgorod, or at least they will be forced to use or will start using HIMARS systems with most likely cluster munition, and I'm not sure that the United States of America will allow the Ukrainians to use HIMARS systems with cluster rounds. Anyway, the Russians reach the main target. They start they start assaulting the main towns, and after that most likely there are going to be some pause. Anyway, we'll see, it depends on the results. So let's start from the beginning, and when talking about the beginning, today let's talk about Udi and Kazachye Lopань directions. Today the Russians also start hunting the armored artillery systems on this direction, because anyway they will be forced to attack Kazachye Lopань and Udi, and today they need to clear the area. They have the first wave of attack of the Russian forces reached 2 important towns. Now they need to activate in this area, and the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they managed to discover the concentration of Russian special forces on, let's say, Udi, Kazachye Lopань direction, and then the Ukrainians start bombing and attacking the Russians. So most likely this is the first video confirming that probably within the next 48 hours the Russians will start offensive in direction of Udi and in direction of Kazachye Lopань. It will be very interesting to follow this situation. When talking about Lyptsi, today we got the first geolocation confirming that the Russians entered this residential part, these dachas, to the northern part of Lyptsi. Some mappers have already adjusted their map, including the neutral Syriac map. Lots of pro-Russian mappers have already adjusted this territory. But when talking about the Ukrainians, they're publishing the video of counter-offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. This building was geolocated, and how the Ukrainians were storming the Russian positions, and after all they managed to capture, let's say, 3 Russian soldiers exactly in this building, in this part of Lyptsi. So for now we're not going to adjust the map, because from one side we have the statements of pro-Russian sources, neutral sources, that the Russians improved their positions, but from the other side we have the videos of Ukraine counterattacks. Most likely this counterattack took place at the first day of clashes, and most likely the Russians did capture this part of Lyptsi. So summarize everything, my opinion is this is the approximately area of Russian control on this direction, but for now we're just waiting for some geolocations and proofs about this. For now, let's wait a little bit. I believe that today we're going to receive them. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing the Ukrainian positions to the east of Lyptsi, and most likely, if the Russians want to capture this village, first of all, the Russians need to move further to the south, trying to semi-encircle Lyptsi and to establish complete fire control over supply roads from Lyptsi to Veselaya, this line. Furthermore, if the Russians want to continue further, of course, sooner or later, we're going to start receiving updates and about the Russian movements on the line Zeleno-Niskushina, because the Russians need to capture, or at least to establish some block, not to capture, not to establish fire control, but to block Veselaya, because now this is the one of the biggest pain, could be biggest pain for the Russians during the next, let's say, waves of, let's say, stage of offensive operation. Now let's move to Vovchansk. We have additional updates, additional reports. We have more prisoners of war captured by the Russians in Vovchansk. By the way, we have additional videos of captured prisoners of war in, let's say, Lyptsi direction as well. But when talking about the situation on the ground, according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions in the central part of the town, and currently the Russians, at least on this direction, control everything almost until the hospital, so this part is already under the Russians. And according to different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian, pro-neutral, and let's say pro-Russian, the Russians began offensive on the eastern part of the northern Vovchansk, and currently entered this territory from this direction and captured, let's say, this line as well. So the Russians are pushing. Currently we can't tell for sure when exactly they're going to finish with the northern part, but most likely very soon, because the Ukrainians are retreating. We have additional videos of clashes inside of the let's say Vovchansk itself, in the area of high-rise building. This is probably the biggest defense fortified area from the Ukrainian side, and if high-rise area falls, of course the Ukrainians will have no chances to hold the northern part at all. But anyway, regarding all these things, we still haven't received any confirmation whether the Russians managed to enter the southern part or whether the Russians managed to capture the southern part, because, as you know, lots of mappers, lots of reporters, lots of Telegram channels have already stated that the Russians captured the southern part as well. All those reports are just, let's say, speculations and wishful thinkings. The Russians haven't entered the southern part at all. Now let's move further, and let's move further to the south. We have additional updates from different directions. The Russians intensified their activity on Kupiansk area. We have a few updates of Russian attempts to in direction of Petropavlovka. Those attacks were repelled, but this is like a signal that the Russians are going to activate. Some activities on this direction as well. We have a significant number of Lancet strikes between Kislovka, Kotlerovka, and Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. So the Russians also start clearing the ground, clearing the, let's say, the establishing the complete domination from their side. And we see that the Russians were pretty more or less successful during the previous night when talking about dominating. They destroyed few artillery systems, they destroyed few tanks. So most likely after a very short operational pause on Kislovka-Kotlerovka direction, the Russians are about to resume their activity and are about to launch another wave of offensive towards the river by the name of Oskol. So this is the situation here. Central Kupiansk and the southern Kupiansk, no changes, no updates. Chasov Yar as well. We haven't received anything during the previous night. And when talking about Avdiivka direction, as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians, let's say, turn to defense state. Currently try to dig in deeper to repel possible Ukrainian attacks, and one of those Ukrainian attacks was more or less successful. And as we discussed, according to information we have, the Ukrainians regained positions between Solovyova and Sokol. Basically, they captured these trenches back again. So the Ukrainians will move further. Of course, they will try probably to cut these fields. So the Ukrainians will try to stick to the Russians to the settlements. I'm not sure what the Ukrainians are going to try to enter the settlements themselves, but anyway, there are going to be more and more attempts from their side. The South Donetsk direction, we have nothing. Urozhaina, nothing. Rabotina, the same story. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation stated that the Russians returned under control the village, established control over the fields, but the Ukrainians starting this morning start publishing updates that they made significant number of counterattacks trying to restore their lost positions. Currently, we don't know. We don't have any videos or geolocations confirming this. The second day in a row, Ukraine attacked Crimea. The second day in a row, the Russians turn on, let's say, air defense alarm. So this is most likely another area where the Russians need to think how to create a buffer zone. And if the Russians are going to create a buffer zone in Crimea, in Kharkiv, that means that they need to establish a buffer zone in Crimea to reduce the, let's say, attacks on the peninsula. And to create a buffer zone, of course, we're talking about Mykolaiv and Odessa. Anyway, let's say regarding the Russian plans, with the Ukrainians most likely managed to achieve results. We have a lot of videos of explosions in Belbek airfield, and the Ukrainians stated that as a result of ATACMS missile strikes, they managed to destroy 2 MiG-31, one S-400 air defense system, and probably many other things that were destroyed during those attacks. And the Russian experts are saying that on the 15th of May is the anniversary of the Crimean bridge, when the Crimea bridge was created and Putin launched the movements along the bridge. So that's why the Ukrainians tried to destroy or to damage the bridge during that anniversary. Kherson direction, we have Mykolaiv. We have report that there was a very heavy explosion in the town, and the Russians stated that they destroyed the armored vehicles warehouse and unmanned Navy drones. And this morning we got the video showing us the Mykolaiv. The video was geolocated. This is the warehouse. This is the warehouse with the Navy drones, and the Russians destroyed that warehouse as a result of Iskander probably strike or something like this. Very heavy explosion. Currently we don't know for sure the results of those strikes, but most likely the warehouse with the Navy drones were destroyed. So this is the situation, and maybe that attack, let's say, prevented the Russians of destroying the Crimean bridge, because the Ukrainians most likely were planning to use this way. Ukraine start more and more often we can receive updates about another blackout in Ukraine. Yesterday there was a blackout in Kharkiv. Today there is a blackout in Kiev, and we're going to see more and more updates of this type. The Russians managed to deal critical damage to the Ukrainian energy facilities. Now let's move to political events. We have some details about the attempts of assassination of the Robert Fico in Slovakia, and according to the, let's say, the shooter, he was unhappy with the government, and why was the media attack. So that was the real reason of his attack, because he was unhappy. Another important thing is that Putin, as was promised, to move to China with a visit yesterday. He arrived this night to China. He had already meeting with Xi Jinping. They discussed a lot, and of course the, let's say, the meeting and the how the China met Putin was everything fine, was everything very nice. We have the photo how Putin arrived. We see let's say a lot of things according to protocol. We see a lot of big delegation, a lot of security, motorcycles, security. So everything was done as a first class or like a business class or something like this. And people in the internet try to compare the visit of Putin to China with the visit, for example, with Antony Blinken to China. We see complete absence of everything. I was surprised watching this video that he had even stairs to go down, but that he wasn't forced to do this by himself. It was like a very big surprise when talking about the way how he was met. The same story about the Chancellor of Germany. He arrived in China but without anything as well. We can be very surprised if he has also the chairs to go down and to fall back, to step back to the surface. So this is the situation, and the China once again confirmed the support of Russia everywhere, and confirmed that the relations between Russia and China is not against the other countries. It's the let's say friendship to improve positions and economy of both countries as well. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.